What's good in the hood YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you guys another video. Today I'm bringing you guys a video on Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel episode 11. This episode was pretty good. It confirmed a few things, and it also led to a conclusion of a story arc that's been going on since about episode 6, having to do with the Galactic Ninjas. Yes, the Galactic Ninjas have been around since episode 6, and this episode basically finishes their whole story. But it does it in a good way, and we'll get into that this episode and about the other point that I mentioned that is it could be potentially really important. We'll get into that. So for starters, what happens is that the episode begins with us seeing that Madame Odious is in her chamber. She's looking at the ninja medallion that's left over, the one that Venema had, and the thing is that Venema is trapped at the Galaxy Warrior Dome, so she can't escape right now, and she wants to prove herself and free herself from the Galaxy Warrior Dome. The only way that she can do that is by helping Madame Odious to defeat the Rangers, and in this case, because it's Valentine's Day, she can take advantage of her ability, which allows her to use her love arrows to make people fall in love with the first person they see. Well, there's a whole story as to why that's going to be very useful for her purposes, and we'll get into that in this episode. But yeah, that's what's going on there. So, what does end up happening from here is that after she decides to agree to go down, we end up seeing the Rangers are at their school. They're looking forward to Valentine's Day because they're going to have a Valentine's dance, and apparently Brody has someone that he's going with. Levi, I think, has someone. Calvin jokes around about, oh, I wonder who I have. I think I have someone I'm going with too, and it's like, oh, maybe it's Haley. Yeah, so that's what's happening there. And Sarah, I don't remember if they actually specifically say if she has someone that she's going with, but it's probably implied. The only one that is the real focus here is Preston. Preston actually wants to go on a date, or more specifically to this dance, with Sandy. Sandy was from episode 9 of Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel. So it's kind of cool because what that basically implies is that she's returning now. And what that could potentially mean is something very much so debated and questioned now, is whether or not she'll become the Green Ninja Steel Ranger. For those who do not know, in Japan, there was a Green Ninja Steel Ranger that was played by, there was a female ranger. The character was introduced much later into the season, so that kind of works with the timing of things for this show. And it could be potentially a really cool thing to see that happen. Maybe we were originally suspecting that Princess Vieira would be the Green Ninja Steel Ranger. She would become it, but the thing is that she hasn't really shown up in recent episodes, so it does seem fairly likely that if a Green Ninja Steel Ranger is happening, it would likely be her. But nothing is officially confirmed as of yet. Keep that in mind for anyone that's getting hopes right now. Nothing is official as of now, but it's possible. It's definitely a possibility. Yeah, so we'll have to wait and see, but it does look like with her returning now after the previous episode, that does make things seem, you know, like there's a better chance. And again, she was in the main story and she had a couple of episodes, so it isn't like she was featured one time like Talon Ranger was in Dino Charge, where really he was introduced in a movie and then he had like one appearance in the show. In this case, she actually had a number of appearances in the show. Not a lot, but enough to the point where she's noteworthy. Anyway, continuing on, what does end up happening is that he's practicing because he wants to invite her to the dance to go out with him. And the thing is that he wants to practice his magic and invite her using a card in his magic as well. So that's all happening. What we do end up seeing in the meantime is that Victor and Monty enter the school, and what happens is that Monty has an archery bow and he has a letter attached to it because what happens is that Victor wants to go on a date or go to the dance specifically with Sandy. Thing is that at first Monty shoots the arrow, hits the teacher at the front desk with the arrow in the head. She reads the letter and isn't really impressed with Monty's aim, and Victor isn't happy either with what Monty did. So at that point, they end up trying to get a closer shot to Sandy. This time what happens is that Monty hides in the corner. Victor approaches Sandy, trying to talk to her and see if she's interested in going to the dance. And what happens is that this time, Monty shoots the arrow and hits Victor in the mouth. when he removes the arrow, it's a poor shot. And the thing is that Sandy says, it looks like Cupid's arrow hit you. And what happens is that Victor's like, yeah, and I'm not too happy about it either. And what happens is that Sandy ends up telling Victor when he asked her if she'd want to go to the dance with him, I would rather go alone than go with you. And what happens is that Victor ends up speaking out loud about how it looks like Sandy would rather go alone to the dance than go with someone. And the thing is that Preston, being someone that apparently takes things that people say as facts rather than listening and verifying things, he believes what Victor says and thinks that that means that he has no chance with Sandy. So he rips up the Valentine that he made for her and gets really upset and goes away. Thing is that at the same time Haley had actually watched him practicing, and so later on what happens is that she ends up asking how did it go with asking Sandy to go to the dance, and he basically says that didn't work very well because she would rather go with nobody than me. Because what happens is that they end up going, I believe, to like a picnic area or something like that, and they're just hanging out and they hear about this. Now what does end up happening is that Haley says, you should approach her, and suddenly she's like walking down the pathway. So what happens is that Preston tries to ask her to go to the dance, but what happens is that they're interrupted by Venema. Venema appears and actually shoots an arrow, hitting Sandy in the backpack. Thing is that initially when Preston goes to help her and bring her to a safe place, he thinks she was shot and that she was affected. Then what happens is that they don't know what actually occurred with Sandy, and suddenly Venema's like, well, why don't I show it on one of you? She ends up shooting her arrow, hitting Brody, making him, because he actually sees Venema, makes him fall in love with her. So it's this first sight arrow shooting action, that whole idea, which is something that's kind of standard when it comes to Cupid, like the idea that the first person you see you fall in love with, similar idea. So basically he ends up crushing on her, and what happens is that he wants to, you know, be with her, but the Rangers try to hold him back. Haley specifically ends up bringing Brody to a place where he won't be trying to get to her. In the meantime, what happens is that we end up seeing that Sarah, Levi, and Calvin end up having to fight Venema. They end up dealing some serious blows, but at one point what happens is that Venema shoots off an arrow, which they dodge, but then two other arrows are shot, hitting Calvin and Levi. So what happens is that they end up crushing on Venema. So at that point we actually have three Rangers that have a crush on Venema. Then what ends up occurring is that we end up seeing the Rangers back at the base. Three of them are doing things to give her some sort of sweet thing, since they have fallen in love with her. In the meantime, the other Rangers are dealing with their own situations. For example, when Mick sees this, he tries to understand what he can do. For example, Brody, he decided to make a special heart ninja star that he hopes to throw into the Ninja Nexus Prism to, create something special for Venema. Levi is trying to create a song for Venema, and Calvin makes a kind of planter using a dump truck that he wants to give to Venema because she's like a bee, and so he wants to take advantage of that and connect with it through that idea of like flowers and bees, and then connecting with his interest in vehicles. So it's clever, it works. Anyway, what does end up happening is that Preston wants to check up on Sandy, and he still hasn't been able to really ask her about going to the dance. And what happens is that Haley says you should just go over and check on her and maybe ask her. And so the thing is that Preston's like, but I don't want to leave you with these guys. And the thing is that they're like, we can handle it. So at that point, Preston goes off to Sandy. He ends up asking her about he ends up talking to her because actually, I believe it's actually that no, I said this wrong. She contacts him via text message saying, I want to talk to you. He ends up going over to her, even though he at first second guesses himself. And then what happens is that Sandy asks him to the dance, what happens is that first he wants to do it, but then he thinks about how she was shot with the arrow. So he believes that he is being asked because he was the first person that she saw, and so he feels like it's not genuine love, and so he doesn't want to accept something where it doesn't feel real, and so he ends up rejecting her, and she ends up being upset. But what happens is that her backpack is left behind. In the meantime, Haley ends up arriving and asks, how did it go? Why does she seem upset? What happened? And he explains that he was asked by her to go to the dance, but he rejected her because she was shot with the arrow, and he feels like it wasn't genuine love. But the thing is that her backpack is still there. So he opens up the backpack. He finds a book inside of it that has the arrow that shot her. That actually what happened was that the arrow ended up hitting the book and didn't actually hit her, meaning that she never was affected by the arrow. In fact, it was as if it never even happened to her. So she had no idea that it was even there to begin with. That's a big difference. And now he feels stupid because he realizes, oh wait, I just told her to, like, she actually did want to go to the dance with me. It wasn't just some fake love. It was real love. And so it's a matter of believing everything and then not believing everything that leads to this kind of, you have to pick and choose and think about things based on the situations, which he wasn't wrong, but in this situation, it led to an not so good setup. Now, what does end up happening is that he wants to correct things. In the meantime, what we end up seeing is that the other Rangers end up going back to the base because they have to deal with the others. Apparently, Calvin, Brody, and Levi end up just deciding to ditch the place and go after Venema. Calvin ends up using his truck to bring the others around. They come up with different ideas as to where they might need to go to find Venema. One suggestion is the beach, one suggestion is the courtyard, another suggestion is the garden. Those are the three suggestions made. The beach was made by Levi, the courtyard was made by Brody, and the garden was made by Calvin because he thinks it would make sense because of her being a bee and her wanting to pollinate and do all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean. So, anyway, what ends up happening is that the Rangers that are in the base, they need to go look for the others. In the meantime, what happens is that Mick ends up creating this special metal material that should be sturdy enough to block an arrow, and make it so that it doesn't actually affect any of them. So what happens is that they make that finally, and then what happens is that Preston gets into a fight with Venema. The way that he knows that Venema's there in the first place is because there's honey on some barrel, like some kind of oil barrel, and he recognizes that must mean that she's in the area. At that point, he transforms, which we hear like some Mighty Morphinized theme, and what happens is that they end up fighting each other. At one point, Venema is shooting arrow after arrow of these love arrows, and then eventually one arrow ends up hitting Preston. At that point, he begins to de-transform and act as if he had been hit and actually had been affected. He ends up getting really close to her, and she asks, because you love me so much, won't you give me your power sword? Because that's really the whole idea, is that maybe this could lead to their love leading to them being willing to give up their power swords. But in this case, what actually happens is that he grabs the arrow from Venema that she has left over, which is the love arrow that controls all the other arrows and their spell, breaks it, and what it does is that after the arrow is broken, her spell is broken, leading to the Rangers, which were trying to look for her, which I forgot to mention this little point, their car broke down. Suddenly the spell wears off. Sarah and Haley meet up with the Rangers that have just had the spell broken off. They have no idea what happened to themselves, but now they know that they have to go help Preston, because clearly if the spell is broken, he must have had to fight them alone. So he's not in a great situation. Anyway, following this, Preston does a finishing attack, and Venema does one as well. They manage to just he manages to destroy Venema, and then at that point, they manage in the Galaxy Warrior Dome to gigantify Venema, making her big, and then they end up summoning the Blaze Zords. It is cool to see the individual Zord cockpit situation, which is always cool for this. And then what happens is they end up using the Blaze Megazord because they combine all the Zords together, and they end up finishing off Venema. And at the end of that whole fight, they say, the end of the Galactic Ninjas. So basically, the Galactic Ninjas are done now. What ends up happening in the next scene is that basically Preston tries to apologize for his actions to Sandy, and he says, I really do want to go to the dance with you. Would you like to go? And she says yes. So it's a happy ending overall. Things are positive. Sandy is now going to go to the dance with Preston. What I forgot to mention, there was a side plot that was going on with Victor and Monty. This whole idea of maybe going to the dance with this other girl, which is willing to go to the dance with them if they give expensive jewelry and nice items and everything. And later on in the episode, they end up giving all these nice items, but they're missing like the balloons that she wants. And so she's like, well, because you didn't get me balloons, I'll take everything else, but I'm not going on a dance with you. I'm not going to the dance with you. So at that point, Victor's upset. Monty's, not happy either because things didn't work out. And the episode basically leads to this kind of funny, kind of tragic ending that's sweet but sad. And it was okay. So that's about it. Overall, this episode, again, as I said before, was okay. It was not the best episode, but it had some good things in it. It does make things seem more likely that we could be getting a Green Ninja Steel Ranger. Again, we still have 9 more episodes, so there is definitely a chance. As far as when it will happen, I'm not expecting it till probably closer to like episode 14 or 15, if not later. Maybe even after that, but we'll have to wait and see if it even happens at all. Again, they may skip it entirely if they don't feel it's necessary. We have to wait and see though, but who knows? You never know. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I love to know your opinions about this episode. Did you enjoy it? What things are you hoping to see in the future? Are you looking forward to the next episode of Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel? And until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71. So goodbye, guys.